They didn't expect me to show up. Not after 9 years of silence. Not after the things they said. Not after they left me out of the family Christmas card and told everyone I was on assignment somewhere classified. That phrase was always easier for them than admitting the truth. I was never what they wanted. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope, smelling faintly of rose water in denial. The handwriting belonged to my mother, elegant and exact. At the bottom, below the RSVP line, she had added one note in blue ink: please dress appropriately. No uniform. That line stung more than anything else on the page. I had just returned from a 6-week deployment off the Pacific coast. My hands were still raw from cold steel. The muscles in my shoulders still ached from bracing during storm surges. I hadn't even unpacked when the mail was slid under my apartment door. The envelope waited like a silent dare. My sister Samantha was getting married. And not just to anyone. She was marrying Lieutenant Daniel Grant, a Navy officer, a man I once trained. A man who, during a search and rescue exercise in Guam, I had pulled out of a downed helicopter after he froze mid-air jump. He owed me his life. He had written that in a letter I kept in a drawer. And now he was tying his life to the woman who once told me I looked like a man trying too hard to be important. The irony tasted metallic. I wasn't planning to go. Not until Simmons called, my old commanding officer. We hadn't spoken in years, but somehow, he always knew. He said one sentence. Just one. Avery, some fires you walk into not to fight, but to make sure no one forgets who got burned. I bought a one-way ticket that night. I wasn't going to make peace. I wasn't going to be part of her perfect little wedding photos. I was going because they needed to remember who I was. Not the daughter they erased. Not the sister they mocked. I was Commander Blake, and I had not come to blend in. My name is Avery Blake. I am 36 years old, born and raised in a small, pine-drenched town in Colorado where every Sunday began with church bells and every family had 3 things on their walls: a cross, a flag, and a wedding photo. I was expected to grow up, find a husband from the congregation, and teach Sunday school like my mother did. But I had other plans. I enlisted at 17. By 19, I was in Annapolis. By 23, I was already on a fast-track promotion path in the Navy. I served in intelligence, then in tactical operations, then was selected for a command track and led a submarine crew in Pacific waters during active threats. I earned 2 stars for my service and a Bronze Star for action in a conflict that officially never happened. They never mentioned it at home. I used to send letters, updates, postcards. My mother never responded. My sister Samantha once mailed back a wedding invitation that wasn't for me. It was for her college roommate. A joke, she said later. But I kept it. Even jokes carry truth. I'm not tall, but I carry myself like I've stood through storms. My hair is always tied back. My spine knows straightness from training, not vanity. I speak when necessary and I don't decorate my voice. When I wear a uniform, I wear all of it: the weight, the history, the silence. On the day I flew to Colorado, I didn't wear my dress blues, though I packed them. I wore beige trousers, a fitted navy blazer, and a white blouse, civilian enough to pass, tailored enough to remind. I didn't plan to make a scene. But I wasn't about to be invisible. My relationship with Samantha? Complicated only if you believe love should come without envy. She was always the golden girl. Long blonde hair, the laugh that parents compared to Belle's. She was homecoming queen, voted most likely to marry rich, and she did. Twice. Her third groom, however, was different. Daniel Grant had discipline. He had backbone. I had helped shape both. When I saw his name on the invitation, my breath hitched not out of jealousy, but confusion. Why him? Why her? Why now? I had last seen Daniel 3 years prior, during a joint forces training program I ran in San Diego. He had nodded respectfully, eyes shadowed with something deeper than protocol. He never once mentioned Samantha. He never asked how I was. But he stood tall when I passed, and that was enough. The last time I saw my family was at my father's funeral. They gave me a back row seat. Samantha had delivered the eulogy. Dad always believed in honor and legacy. She said. Not once did she mention I was in uniform. Not once did she say my name. Afterward, as we stood outside under the blistering sun, my mother said, "Thank you for not wearing your medals." It would have distracted. That was 9 years ago. And still, when I walked toward the gate at Denver International Airport, duffel slung over one shoulder, I felt that same pressure around my ribs. That same reminder that in my family's eyes, I had never been the daughter they wanted. I was a symbol they didn't know how to fit into their frame. And now I was about to walk back into that frame. Not to fit, but to tilt it entirely. The drive from the airport to my childhood neighborhood felt like peeling skin from old wounds. The streets were too neat, the trees too symmetrical. Lawns looked like magazine ads for control. I passed the church where I was baptized, confirmed, and last seen at age 16 before I skipped Sunday service for a Navy entrance exam. The house stood exactly as I remembered it, white shutters, navy trim. A flagpole with the American flag freshly replaced. Everything was staged, pristine, untouched by time except for the cracks in the foundation no one wanted to see. My mother greeted me at the door in beige slacks and a pale pink blouse, pearls at her neck, smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. Avery, she said like it was a term she had rehearsed but never liked. You made it, I nodded. Her eyes traveled down my outfit, scanning for violation. Thank you for respecting the dress code. I didn't reply. The inside of the house smelled like lemon polish and restraint. Samantha was already there, flitting about the kitchen in a lace-trimmed ivory top and heels too tall for comfort. Her hair was blown out to soft waves, face glowing from a recent facial or good lighting. She looked perfect. Manufactured, but perfect. Well, look who the wind dragged in, she said cheerfully, not looking up from the silverware she was arranging. Didn't think you'd actually show. You invited me, I said. Mom insisted, she replied quickly, glancing at our mother. I told her it might complicate things, but she thought it would be good optics. And besides, Daniel was curious. I froze. Curious? Samantha shrugged, still not looking at me. You made quite the impression back in San Diego, you know. All those drills. He said you had this, what did he call it? Command presence. She giggled. It's a bit much, honestly. I said nothing. I'd trained myself for this. The passive-aggressive commentary disguised as charm. The jabs wrapped in laughter. But this was different. Daniel wasn't just some ex she was flaunting. He was someone who had seen me led. Someone who had once saluted me. I wondered if he knew what he was walking into. That evening was the rehearsal dinner. Candlelight, piano music, a long table set for 30 guests at a private vineyard nearby. Everyone dressed like it was a political fundraiser. I was seated at the far end, near the service entrance. My name was written on a folded card. Avery B. No title, no indication that I had any identity beyond a courtesy seat. I recognized some of the guests, old neighbors, Samantha's college friends, family members who hadn't spoken to me since my father's burial. The room was filled with polished shoes and brittle smiles. At one point, during a lull in conversation, Samantha stood and tapped her glass with a fork. I'd like to propose a little toast, she said, beaming. To the people who made this day possible, to love, to new beginnings. And to everyone who's here tonight, including my big sister who somehow managed to leave her submarine just long enough to honor us with her silence. A ripple of laughter moved across the table. Polite. Controlled. A few winced. Most smiled. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My mother didn't correct her. She raised her glass instead and said, to Samantha. The daughter who stayed. That was the blow. Not the joke. The dismissal. The framing of me as someone who left and never returned. The one who traded love for duty. I took a sip of water and looked across the table. Daniel sat quietly, one hand around his wine glass, the other resting on the table. He hadn't laughed. His eyes met mine for half a second, unreadable. Then he looked away. The room buzzed again with chatter. The moment passed for them. But it didn't pass for me. It burned. I sat through the rest of the evening without touching my food. Every word from Samantha was a performance. Every nod from my mother. A validation. They had invited me not to honor me but to tame me, to prove that even someone like me could be seated, silenced, and staged. But they didn't know the war they had awakened. I left before dessert. No goodbyes. No hugs. Just a quiet exit through the side door and the taste of ash in my mouth. As I stepped into the cool night air, I looked up at the stars. They had always been clearer here. But that night, they felt cold. like watchers, like witnesses. I knew then that the wedding day would not go how they planned. Not because I would make a scene, but because truth has a way of surfacing, louder, heavier, sharper, when it has been silenced too long. The wedding took place at a century-old chapel nestled at the foot of the Rockies. Everything had been curated to perfection. White peonies lined the aisle, gold-trimmed programs were placed delicately on each seat, and a harpist played near the altar as if sound itself had been hand-picked. Guests arrived in silk and tailored suits, drifting between pews and posing for candid photos that had been carefully pre-approved. I arrived 5 minutes before the ceremony, wearing my full dress blues. Not to cause a scene, not even to protest, but because sometimes a uniform says what 1,000 words cannot. As I stepped into the entryway, the usher hesitated, eyes trailing the medals across my chest. "Table 12, he said after a beat, pointing toward a corner near the back. "By the emergency exit." I nodded. Of course. The placement was not accidental. I made my way toward the pew without glancing sideways. A few guests turned, whispers trailing behind me. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Their silence was enough. Daniel stood at the altar, his posture impeccable, his eyes trained forward. Samantha, in a custom lace gown, glowed beneath the stained glass light. Her veil shimmered as she moved with a deliberate grace only she could perfect. The officiant began the vows. I sat, straight-backed, hands folded. No one acknowledged me. When the call came for close family to come forward for the ceremonial blessing, I rose instinctively, more from muscle memory than invitation. But before I could take a step, a hand pressed lightly to my arm. My mother's voice, low and smooth, slipped into my ear. "Let's not confuse things today. It's Samantha's moment. Don't make this about you." My breath caught. Her hand was light, but her message was weighted like stone. I looked at her face. Still calm, still smiling. I sat back down, not because I agreed, but because I wanted the silence that followed to scream. The ceremony ended with applause and photos. Outside, champagne was passed, and Samantha made her rounds like royalty. I remained in the shadows, tucked behind a pillar, watching. Then came the reception. A grand ballroom inside a vineyard lodge. Chandeliers dripped with crystals. A jazz band played near the fireplace. My table sat near the kitchen door. The place card read simply, R. Blake. No rank, no title. The napkin was cream instead of ivory. Whether it was a mistake or another subtle message, I couldn't tell. I barely had time to process it when Samantha took the stage. She held a microphone in one hand and her champagne flute in the other. Her smile stretched wide, bright, curated. "I want to thank everyone who came today," she began, voice light. "Especially those who traveled far. Even my big sister, who flew in from wherever it is she works guarding something top secret." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Truly," she continued, "it's nice she could leave the submarine long enough to see what real love looks like." More laughter. Louder. Sharper. My fingers tightened around the base of my glass. I didn't move. "And let's be honest," she added, "who needs romance when you've got medals, right?" She scanned the room, letting the words hang. Then she turned toward me. "Everyone give a warm round of applause to the woman who proves that femininity is optional when you have a badge." Some guests chuckled politely. Others shifted, unsure. Most simply followed her cue. My mother clapped slowly. I stood. Not abruptly. Not with anger. But with precision. Every movement deliberate. Every line of my uniform in place. Daniel was watching me. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't moved. But now, he stood. Calmly. With purpose. He walked the length of the room. Every eye turned as he moved past tables, past guests, past his own mother who looked startled. When he reached me, he stopped. 1 pace away. Then he saluted. A crisp, perfect Navy salute. The kind given only to someone whose authority you recognize fully. "Ma'am," he said, voice clear and unwavering, "please forgive my wife." The room fell into a silence so complete it vibrated. He turned, facing the crowd. "This," he said, "is Commander Avery Blake. She led my unit when I froze mid-operation during an advanced combat exercise. She saved my life. And more than that, she shaped my career, my values, my spine. Today, I regret not making this clear sooner." Murmurs spread, followed by audible gasps. Somewhere, a glass shattered. Samantha stood frozen. The microphone slipped from her fingers, hit the floor, and rolled. My mother stood abruptly, face pale. She opened her mouth but said nothing. Daniel remained at attention until I returned the salute, slow and steady. The silence didn't break. It deepened. That was the moment the illusion fractured. The room saw not the sister they erased, but the force they tried to suppress. The woman they had tried to define by absence was now commanding their attention without uttering a single word. And I was just getting started. I did not need a microphone. I did not raise my voice. The silence spoke for me. It wrapped around the chandelier crystals, curled around the wine glasses, pressed into the velvet of every guest's chair. I saw it in the twitch of my mother's fingers, the way she reached for a napkin only to fumble and let it fall. I saw it in Samantha's frozen posture, her spine stiff yet shaking, her face drained of the smug brightness she had worn all day. The girl who ruled this room with practiced charm was now reduced to stillness. And Daniel? He stood there beside me, no apology in his stance, only truth. He stepped back slowly, giving me the floor. Not offering it, acknowledging that it was already mine. One by one, eyes shifted to me, not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but out of recalibration. Guests who had laughed now looked away. A retired Navy colonel near the back rose slowly. His posture, still impeccable despite his age, snapped into a crisp salute. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Another followed. A woman in a navy blue dress, gray streaks in her hair, rose and nodded once before lifting her hand in silent acknowledgement. Then another. 4 salutes in total. None loud. All deliberate. All devastating to the illusion that had just shattered. My mother whispered, "This isn't the time." But no one turned to her. She had lost the room. The axis of attention had shifted, and it wasn't going back. I let the moment breathe. I didn't speak because silence, when earned, can split stone. A man near the center of the ballroom, a defense contractor I vaguely remembered from my father's retirement party, leaned toward his wife and muttered something that sounded like I didn't know she was still active duty. She looked at him and said, "She's more than active. She's in command." That was the fracture widening. That was history correcting itself in real time. Samantha finally stepped forward, only slightly. Her voice was tight. "It was a joke," she said. "You always took things too seriously." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words fell like broken glass, sharp, scattered, and impossible to walk around. She looked at Daniel. He didn't return her gaze. That's when she realized she had not just lost control of the room. She had lost control of the narrative. Everything she built, her perfect bride image, her curated reputation, her years of sly belittling, collapsed under the weight of one act of respect. And I didn't have to defend myself. He had done that for me. Because truth, when spoken with clarity, does not need repetition. I remained standing just long enough for it to settle. Then I nodded once and returned to my seat. Not out of defeat, but because the war was already over. The applause didn't come. I wouldn't have wanted it. But the acknowledgement remained. It hung in the air like a newly drawn boundary. No one dared cross it. And that was louder than any ovation. The next morning, the hotel lounge smelled of burnt espresso and artificial vanilla. I sat near the window in a navy turtleneck and pressed slacks, hair pulled back in a low knot, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. The light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting everything in that pale, washed-out glow reserved for the morning after things fall apart. Samantha walked in 10 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her heels clicked with uncertain rhythm. She slid into the seat across from me without removing her glasses. "I suppose you're pleased with yourself," she said flatly. I didn't answer. She adjusted the collar of her beige blazer. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I studied her for a moment, then reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document. I placed it on the table between us. She stared at it. "What's this?" "An anonymous report," I said evenly. "Filed with the Navy's Office of Inspector General. 4 years ago. It accused me of falsifying operational records, inflating my rank eligibility, and exaggerating details about the Guam rescue." Her face didn't move. I unfolded the second page. "This is the linguistic analysis we ran on it last year after the Navy began investigating coordinated sabotage claims. The analysis shows a 97% match with writing samples pulled from your graduate thesis. Her jaw tensed. You're insane. And yet, I said calmly, you always used the phrase, grossly overstated, even in high school papers. It's not common. And the double spacing after periods? Classic Samantha. Her hands balled into fists in her lap. You're reaching. Am I? I asked, sliding the final page toward her. A performance review from my promotion board. It noted a sudden red flag in my file and delayed my promotion to Rear Admiral by 18 months. This cost me more than a rank, I said. It cost me operational command. And you did it because you couldn't stand that Dad said he was proud of me one time at dinner. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed in fatigue, not mascara. I was tired of being compared to you, she whispered. Of being the pretty one, the soft one, the one who stayed home and married right while you got all the medals and attention. You left, but somehow you still took up space. I nodded slowly. So you tried to erase me. I wanted to matter, she snapped. So did I replied. But I chose to earn it. She looked away, ashamed or exposed or both. I stood, collecting my coat. I'm not here to seek an apology, I said. I'm here to make something clear. You may have tried to sabotage my career, but what you failed to understand is that rank doesn't just live on paper. It lives in people. In who respects you when no one's watching. In who stands up when you don't ask. She didn't respond. I paused, then added, the next time you tell a room full of people that I'm unfeminine, remember this. Grace is not about softness. It's about strength under control. And you have neither. I left her there, seated alone, surrounded by the pieces of a plan that had backfired. That evening, I met with 2 retired officers and a federal liaison at a modest restaurant near downtown. We didn't toast. We drafted. By midnight, the first documents for a new initiative were complete. A program designed to protect military careers from personal sabotage. A system to ensure no one else's promotion file would be stalled by a bitter sibling or a vindictive spouse. And I named it not after myself but after what I never received from my own bloodline. The Homefront Integrity Act. Truth made into policy. Pain turned into protection. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. 3 weeks later, in a community center on the edge of Denver, folding chairs lined a room that smelled faintly of floor polish and weak coffee. No chandeliers here, no monogrammed napkins or curated flower arrangements. Just real people. Veterans, active duty personnel, spouses, even a few teenagers in JROTC uniforms. Some wore medals, some wore scars. All of them wore the weight of stories no one had believed until now. A simple banner hung on the wall behind me, tilted slightly from one corner, Homefront Integrity Initiative, we defend those who defend us. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I stood at the front, not in uniform this time, but in a black sweater and slacks, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the tattoo I had gotten after my first deployment. A quiet reminder of survival. Thank you all for coming, I began, voice even. You're not here because you need rescue. You're here because someone tried to define you without asking for your truth. And you're done being silent. Heads nodded. Some blinked too fast. One woman near the back clutched a folder like it was armor. The military trains us to fight enemies from without. But no one prepares us for the betrayal from within. When your own family becomes the first strike. When silence becomes a tactic they use against you. I know what that feels like. But I also know what it feels like when you stop asking to be included and start building what they tried to keep you from. A young man, couldn't have been older than 19, stood slowly, his uniform crisp but his hands trembling. My sister was discharged last year, he said. They said she was unstable after she reported harassment. No one took her seriously. She's at home now, afraid to even put on the uniform she once loved. He paused. But I told her about this meeting. About you. And she cried. I nodded. Bring her next time, I said. Or don't. Just tell her she's not alone. He sat back down, exhaling like he'd been underwater. Another woman stood. Mid-40s, scar on her cheek, Air Force by posture. They called me dramatic, she said. My own brother told our command I made it all up. I lost my clearance. My pension. I didn't even know where to begin. I looked her in the eye. Begin here. After the session, I stayed to speak with anyone who lingered. A dozen did, maybe more. One handed me a letter. Another asked for help filing paperwork. None of them asked about Samantha. None of them asked about the wedding. They didn't care who had tried to humiliate me. They cared that I was still standing. That I hadn't walked away from the fire, I had walked through it. A local reporter was there. She asked for a quote. "Is this personal for you?" She asked. "All policy is personal," I replied. "If it isn't, it's just decoration." That night, I watched the video of my speech go viral. Not because of fame, but because people recognized the silence I had described. They had lived it. The comments weren't full of outrage. They were full of relief. Of people saying, "Finally. Someone said it." At the bottom of one post, someone wrote, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the floor." I closed my laptop, not with finality, but with peace. The kind you earn after years of war no one knew you were fighting. I didn't need revenge. I had relevance. I didn't want apology. I had action. And I no longer craved being seen. I had become the mirror others saw themselves through. That was enough. The cottage sat on a hill in the southern coast of Italy, overlooking a sea so wide and still it felt like memory made liquid. I had rented it for the season, told no one except Simmons, who simply replied, "About time." The walls were whitewashed, the shutters blue, the terrace shaded by lemon trees that dropped fruit like offerings. There was no television, no clocks, just the rhythm of light and the breath of waves. I spent the mornings painting, not for exhibition. Not even for clarity, but to see what came out of me when I stopped guarding everything. My journal sat open most days beside the easel, filled with ink-stained thoughts I no longer tried to organize. One afternoon, around 4, a boy from the village came up the path, barefoot, holding a small basket of olives, bread, and a folded newspaper. His smile was wide, gap-toothed, and real. "Per te," he said. "For you." I thanked him. Before running off, he paused and looked at me. "Are you really a commander?" I smiled. "Once," I said. "Now I'm just someone who remembers what it meant." He nodded like that made perfect sense, then disappeared back down the hill. I opened the paper. A tiny article on page 9 mentioned the new military protections passed through a subcommittee that week. The Home Front Integrity Act had gained traction. My name wasn't mentioned. That was fine. I hadn't written it to be remembered. I had written it so others wouldn't be erased. Later that evening, my old phone vibrated in a drawer I rarely opened. It was the device issued to me years ago, now used only for official matters. A single voicemail blinked. It was Simmons. "Avery," his voice said, calm and solid. "The Joint Ethics Board has an opening. The President's office wants you to chair it. Think about it." I did. For a full minute. Then I deleted the message. Not out of bitterness, but because I had found something I never had in those halls. Stillness. Clarity. No uniform required. I sat at my desk, opened the journal to its final page. Dipped my pen, and wrote 7 words. I walked alone, but I was never lost. Then I closed it, locked it in a drawer with medals I no longer displayed, and walked out onto the terrace. The sun was lowering over the water, casting everything in gold. The wind caught my hair, brushing strands across my face. I let it. The sea was quiet, the sky endless. No applause. No cameras. Just a woman who had once been silenced now listening only to herself. Somewhere far away, my family still existed. They probably still whispered, still avoided questions, still practiced revision. But I no longer needed their words. I had found mine. In truth. In action. In peace. I had become something they could no longer diminish. Not a scandal. Not a shadow. Not a sister with too much ambition. But a name that carried weight. Not because I demanded it. But because I had earned it. And now, in the quiet, I could finally hear what they never could. The sound of a life chosen, not dictated. The sound of freedom. The kind you write yourself into. The kind no one can edit. The kind that echoes long after you stop speaking. And that, more than any salute or ceremony, was the legacy I chose to keep.